Okay. Thank you for inviting me to come to Athens to speak to you. And I would like to speak about this topic, open and closed visiting times. But I would like to introduce myself first. I'm from the Netherlands. My name is Michael Kuiper. I'm a neurologist intensivist, and I work in Leeuwarden, which is up north. And it looks a bit like this. It's quite flat everywhere. It's the flower time at the moment, so we have many flowers now. This is the hospital where I work, and I don't have any conflict of interest. The two questions that I would like to talk about is it good to have open visiting hours in your ICU? And are family members and friends, if they come to the open visiting hours, are they a risk for infection for your patient? As you all know, we live in a time of patient-centered care, and one of the main ingredients of patient-centered care is involvement of family and friends in the care of the patient. And many of our intensive care societies have statements like this, that there's a lot of evidence that shows that unrestricted presence and participation of family and friends can enhance patient well-being and family satisfaction, can also improve safety of care, and it can even lead to a higher satisfaction of the staff. Of course, there are many fears if you open up your ICU for visiting all the time. Will the presence of family disrupt the work of nurses and doctors? Will nurses and doctors be able to explain to the family everything that is going on? And will the family pose a risk for infection for the patient? So let's start with the second question. Do visitors bring infection to the ICU? Is this, a family member holding a hand, is this a danger? And of course, we are all very much busy with working with infections, and we're very much afraid of it happening to our patients. But of course, you cannot have a talk on infections and infections being brought in the hospital if you don't mention Semmelweis. And of course, you know what he did, and his life was intriguing enough for great writers like Céline from France to write a thesis about him. But it's about this. It's about childbirth fever, puerperal fever mortality, and it was quite high in Vienna in the late 19th century, middle 19th century. And it was even so bad that a lot of women did not want to go to the so-called first clinic where the doctors were taking care of. The second clinic, it was where the midwives were, and some women preferred to give birth in the street before going to this first clinic. Samuel was thinking about the difference, and he could not come up with an answer. The second clinic was more crowded even than the first. The climate in both clinics was the same. There was not a real difference, until he noted that a good friend of his got a sepsis and died after he was punctured by a knife doing a post-mortem examination. And then it occurred to him that it could be the doctors that would be bringing the germs from the post-mortem examination. So it was the conclusion that the doctors were the hazard. It was not the visitors or even the other patients. And hand washing was installed in the hospital. And after that intervention, you see, the infection rate was brought down a lot. And you can see these are the monthly figures. It was really impressive. And they later compared it with data from a Dublin maternity ward, and you see that the increase occurred in 1823, and it was at the onset of the pathological examinations. So that was really the problem. It's quite obvious, and everyone would agree on it now. But in his time, there was a lot of opposition, and many doctors said, well, doctors are gentlemen, and gentlemen's hands are clean. It was said by Charles Meigs, an American obstetrician. So he had a lot of opposition, and you know that he didn't end well. When he was 37, he was institutionalized in a mental institution. He was severely beaten up, and he died 2 weeks later after a gangrenous infection. So the danger are mainly the physicians and the nurses. If we look at another problem which we have of infection in our ICU, then we have to start with John Snow. And John Snow, you know, from anesthesiology and is a pioneer of epidemiology. And he mapped the cholera cases in an area of London, and he found that the source of all the problems was a public water supply, the Broad Street pump. He had mapped all the victims, and it was centered around here, Broad Street. He closed Broad Street pump, and cholera went down and disappeared. So what it has to do with our ICUs? Well, we still have something like that in our ICUs. We have Pseudomonas in our ICU sinks. There are quite a lot of that to be found in hospitals. And there's nothing new. We know this already from the 70s. There are many old papers on this. So it's probably the nurses who wash the patients who can be a danger for our patients to bring Pseudomonas. And removing all those things from the ICU may remove the source from Pseudomonas and Klebsiella infections. And some hospitals have done that, and they started to work water-free, and they don't have any sinks anymore in the hospital, or especially not in the ICU. And there's another real danger for the patient, and that's the patient himself. Selective decontamination of the digestive tract works on that. It is aimed at getting rid of the potential pathogens that you carry yourself. The danger is in the secondary endogenous infection, not in a primary exogenous infection while you're in the ICU. So I will not go through all the data. We have seen that on many other talks, I think. There's a lot of data proving that it's very effective something to do, but we are still very much afraid of if we supply STD, if we apply STD, that we have a lot of antimicrobial resistance in our ICU. And I don't think that is really a problem. If you look at later studies that were done, then you see that if you use STD to get rid of the potential pathogens of your patients, then also the colonization of potential multi-resistant bugs goes down. But this may be true in the Netherlands. It may not be the same in Greece. As you see, we have a lot lower, in countries like this, we have a lot lower occurrence of multi-resistant bugs, and especially in the part in the north where I live, we hardly see those patients. It may be a lot different here over here where you live. It's the same for others, like MRSA, so it may be a bit different for you. But my conclusion would be is that we do not need to be so afraid of infection being brought in by visitors. The sources of infection for a patient are the doctors, the nurses, the sinks, and the patient himself. So what can we do about that? We can, well, wash our hands as good as we can. But you see there's a lot of work to do to wash your hands thoroughly. And we just heard that more than a century ago, they thought that doctors were gentlemen and gentlemen's hands are clean, but if you look at these hands, there are many places where bacteria can hide. Under the ring, under the wristwatch, and even under the long collars. I've taken some pictures from hand hygiene, which I could find on the web, from websites that really advocate to wash your hands very thoroughly. And even on those pictures, you can see things which amaze me, like there are still rings on the fingers. This is from the NHS. Beat the bugs. A lot of people show their hands, they're just washing them, but still there's one who's wearing a ring, which is not a good idea when you work in the ICU. This is from my hospital. This is 2 days ago. I was working with one of the residents. We were aproned and gloves. And this is me examining the same patients in the same way. And after we do that, we wash our hands using sterilium hand alcohol. This is sufficient for all of our nurses and for all of our doctors. We ask our family members just to wash their hands and nothing else. You see apron and gloves and hand alcohol. This we hardly ever do, using full garments with masks and things like that, only for very severe infections like a very severe viral pneumonia, for MRSA or for other multi-resistant bugs. But still, it can be very different in your hospital where you may have many more patients with multi-resistant bacteria. We have very few of these patients. Okay, then what about the open hours? Is that such a good idea? There are risks and benefits. The risk is the infection. I've talked about that. I don't think that is really a great problem. It may comfort the patient if there's family around. It can be a disruption of work, but on the other hand, it can may be a comfort for the family to be there. Family may be forced to be there all the time, but on the other hand, family does not need to reschedule their lives. They can just go on, come after the work, come when the children are at school or at times that will suit them. Family may question tests, procedures and nursing care, but on the other hand, family may see what's going on and may appreciate what's going on. We still have a problem that if we have family around all the time, they may have easy access to drugs, and we have to be careful with that. But on the other hand, less complications with patients have been described. I visited an ICU in Odense. It's always good if you have the chance to look at what someone else is doing in another country. And in Odense they have open hours, and we walked around and we saw that they were the hospitality was great. We felt very welcome. They had signs on the door that said, please knock, patient privacy is important. And what really struck me, it was very quiet. There were not many people walking around, it was not noisy, there were not many people on the corridors. But it may be different in another country, like Brazil. A study from that showed that the perception of the open visiting policy by intensive care workers was not that positive. A lot of people saw it as something that impairs the organization of intensive care. The work was more interrupted, but, and I think this is the most important thing, the median visiting time per day was 11.5 hours. Half of the day family was there, which is really different from some other studies which I will show. Family, the nurses really appreciated it if they were asked if they would have liked it for themselves, if a family member would be hospitalized, but they thought they lacked in communication and they really would like to have some communication training. This is a study from Italy showing that there's a reduced cardiocirculatory complications with unrestricted visiting policy. And they looked at many things, but most of them showed that unrestricted UVP, so unrestricted visiting policy, showed a better result for many things. But I have to notice that the visiting time in this Italian study was with restricted time 1 hour per day, but unrestricted time 2.5 hours per day. It's really different from the 11.5 hours in Brazil. And I don't know what it would be for Greece, but in Holland it would never be 11.5 hours, it would be 2.5 hours, something similar to Italy. They also looked at contamination, and they saw an increase in contamination a little bit, especially in the corridor, and they saw a little bit of bacteria on the surfaces. But this did not lead to extra infections or to extra mortality. Others have more or less reported the same. Neuroscience units, they saw a positive effect of it. And now you're probably wondering what we are doing ourselves. And this is the sign outside the unit, and it will be probably just as unreadable as Greek is to me for you, but this says this is a closed unit. While we try to have an open unit, we still are closed. And just I told you a little earlier that the problem that we have is that we don't have our pharmacy departments in our unit completely closed. So that is still an obstacle. If we can have these completely closed, we can have a completely open unit. What we ask of family members when they come is when they come and when they go to wash their hands with sterilium, with hand alcohol. And our opening times are from 11 in the morning to 8 o'clock in the evening, but they can always come in when there's something special is happening. Conclusion is that the patient has not much to fear from visiting relatives or friends, and that we as physicians and nurses need to be careful and wash our hands. I think that the infection that we nowadays have to really be afraid of are the computer infections, ransomware and stuff like that, and cyber attacks. This is not really a danger. So I would like to thank you for listening and really take your time to wash your hands thoroughly.